Okay, looks like we are live once again. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Mission Top live stream. Mission Top is a farmstead and ranch, but these live streams are about what else Mission Top is about, which is being a place for philosophia, for cultivating a love of wisdom. And this streaming project is an ongoing 90-day project to get out a number of ideas that I've kind of stored up for a long time, and try to develop these ideas in rough draft form, engage with you on them, get your feedback, and hopefully over the next part of the year, start turning these into more polished video essays. So thank you for being here, for participating in this project. For those of you that love the ideas in and of themselves, I think these streams will probably be very interesting to you. For those of you that like YouTube for the visuals and the sounds and the bells and whistles and stuff, the future videos will probably be what you will be most interested in as much as I'm assuming you're even interested in the topic, which is why you clicked on this video. But today we are going to be jumping into a topic that has been on my mind just over the last few days. And I've kind of found, after doing these streams, we're now kind of in the third month of these streams, that those usually end up being the best ones because they're the things I can talk about with some interest, with some conviction, because they've been on my mind in the last few days. And this particular topic proceeded from a conversation with my wife, one of those where you've turned out the lights at the end of the day, you're in bed, and at least us, we get talking sometimes. And it's funny how sometimes at those moments right before sleep is where, if you're anything like me, the topics can come out about oftentimes frustrations, doubts in the world. Maybe those are where kind of some musings on death and really confronting death. What is it? Those kind of things kind of confront you in that state where you yourself, I think, are a little bit closer to disillusion and death, and as much as in the daily cycle, where sleep is something very akin to a death and then a rebirth the next morning. So it was in one of those conversations that took us, I don't know, into eventually arriving at a far later bedtime than we wanted to, because we talked about it for some time, that we got into this discussion about religion and how it's very interesting, because at least for myself, this has been one of probably the most engaging time of my life in the last few years as far as religion. I feel more engaged with it, more involved with it. Like religion and religious ideas are impacting my life, transforming me, if you will, more than they ever have. But simultaneously, at the same time, I've never felt more frustrated with religion as a whole, and even my own faith tradition. And so, these are the kind of things that I don't think we should shy away from and just kind of keep in our own minds. I think they're the best things to talk about, and what's exactly going on in our minds. And so I wanted to make this video and try to put out the ideas that have been in my mind as to what is most compelling about religion, at least to me. I'm not pretending that I can come up with a comprehensive list, but also what are the greatest problems with religion, basically all religions that I'm seeing right now, and why those are leading to this continuing trend of people abandoning their religions for, in my mind, very understandable reasons. The ways that religions are behaving today as institutions, I think, accounts very well for why people are also abandoning them, while simultaneously it doesn't mean that people are stopping believing in the divine, in higher things. You'll find, at least as far as the articles and studies that I've read, that most people remain religious, or if not religious, then spiritual. They believe in higher things, oftentimes still in God and things, but they're frustrated with their institutional religion. And so what are the weaknesses that are kind of coming to the fore today? At least some of them that I see. And again, I'm not pretending the list of weaknesses is comprehensive either. And so that's where you come in. If you think I'm leaving out some fundamental strengths of religion, please talk about them in the chat and bring them up, and I will add them to my list. And if you think that I'm missing out on some of the fundamental weaknesses right now in religion, then also please bring that up. I will be curious to see what you have to say, and very interested in discussing with those with you. Usually the way it proceeds is I kind of talk about what I wanted to present at the first part of the stream, engage a little bit if I see some of the chat going on, but by the end, if there's questions and comments, then I stay on at the end as long as you want to, engaging with your questions and comments. So with that, let's see, I guess there was one more point I had here written down that I want to point out, and that is that the curious thing is that my engagement, as I said right now, I'm feeling more engaged with religion than ever before. But the curious thing is that engagement is not coming from any one single religion, including my own. Even though I would say that right now I am more engaged in my own religious tradition, more curious about it than I ever have been. And I've always been, a full participant in my own religious tradition, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I've always been very delved into both the doctrine and the history of it, but I've even been more so lately. But again, same thing. It simultaneously at the moment where I'm most engaged in it, I'm also most frustrated with it. And the insights that are coming from religion to me, the things that are most engaging, are not just coming from my own faith tradition, they're coming from multiple faith traditions, while at the same time I'm seeing also the weaknesses of these multiple faith traditions as well. So that's worth saying in this. So let's dive into the strengths then. And the first one that I'm going to list as to the major strengths of religion is that religion offers a comprehensive narrative or worldview. And that today is showing itself as fundamentally important because those people that don't have a comprehensive narrative or worldview, I think, are the ones that are most suffering from one of the other things that is going on today, which is this crisis of meaning. Finding a lot of people that don't have sufficient meaning in their life and are seeking it. That word meaning I'm seeing popping up everywhere now. It's kind of, how words kind of become buzzwords in society for a while, and meaning, at least in the last 3 to 5 years, has become one of those. It's even something, of course, anytime something becomes popular, then you find in our society people wanting to make money off of it. So I've seen it more in advertisements and things like that, businesses built up around it, etc. But in any case, it's something that we're focusing on, right? And I think that we've done a whole stream on what is meaning. And so religion is very much tied into that, because I think religion offers the fundamental components of what gives us that sense of meaning. And one of these is a comprehensive narrative or worldview. And what I mean by that is essentially a grand story that accounts for fundamental things going on in your life around you, and gives you and is a story that you can also live in and participate in. Okay, so that is so powerful in your life, because essentially that tells you, usually in any comprehensive story, it tells you what came before, right? What's going on now in the story, and what is going to happen next in the story. And then it gives you a place in the story and says, here's where you are, here's your importance, here's your place in the story, here's where you need to head to fulfill the optimal place that you can play in that story. And so, one of the best examples of this is just the basic Christian story. And I've especially loved seeing in recent years and learning how the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, and many traditions that are kind of closer to that kind of Orthodox position or original position, live this out by way of the liturgical calendar, where essentially every year they take the cycle of the Christian story and they encourage people to participate in those with days marked off as as the days that events take place, such as the birth of Christ and the death and resurrection of Christ, of course, being the main ones, but plenty of others, days tied up with important events by saints and whatnot. And in that, they not only have the story, but then that liturgical calendar is the means by way people can participate in the story. And reading Mircea Eliade, this scholar, this famous scholar of religion, the thing he points out about that is when people participate in a mythical story like that, and by mythical I don't mean untrue, I mean fundamentally perennially true story, that story recurs every time. It's not like you're just remembering what happened in the past. You're participating in it in a very real way, and in such, you're able to actually be part of the story, and the story affects you and changes you. And so you can see that when that's done well in religion, it's done very well, and people can enter, see their whole lives as framed by this story. And in as much as they do so, then their life makes sense to them. And what is, another way of saying making sense? It means it has meaning, right? Whereas the kind of opposite of that is what a lot of people are facing with the meaning crisis, is that a kind of more materialistic worldview that's crept in and become our society's dominant worldview has taught us that, everything that we experience out in the world is actually an illusion, right? That we have this stuff going on in our minds and our consciousness, but then there's the real stuff out there, the atoms and the molecules that make up the table and things like that. You might see the table and experience in a certain way, but there's a fundamental level that you can't access out there, that is not, it has no meaning to it, and that's the real level. And that's the way we're kind of taught in a lot of ways to think about the world, is that these kind of stories that we've told ourselves are actually, they're just kind of happening in our minds. They're imaginary, they're make-believe, they're superstition, and that what's really going on is there's just matter and molecules bumping out against each other in different ways out there, and it has no meaning. And that's crept in and underlied our society in many ways, to the point that whether you even think you believe in that or not, that's the way people live out their lives. And so that story is one without any meaning. So you can kind of see the contrast to that, right? All right, so religion does that when it's done well, and then it can also supply the other components of meaning. So that was kind of a narrative order of, we've talked about before, that is part of meaning, that gives people a sense of purpose or direction in their life. But there's also a few other components of meaning, a coherence that can arise. You need coherence in your life in order to have meaning in your life. And that's, again, what religion can also offer. In these kind of fundamental worldviews, things make sense in relation to each other. They make sense why things would be happening the way they do. A lot of these fundamental worldviews make an account of suffering, or show how suffering can be overcome, or show how, even though bad things may happen here, there's a next life, right, in which it makes it all worth it, of why these things may be happening to you, right? And so it can give you that sense of, oh, this all makes sense then. And then they offer that sense of significance of value. That's the normative order that we brought up here before, which is, it gives you a sense of what's important and what's not. So religions can kind of remind you, what's important, maybe your interpersonal relationships with your family, a religion might say, as opposed to, just an accumulation of money. That's not as important. It tells you, marks off what's important, what's not, and gives you that sense of security that, like, oh, then I can see what's most important, right? So you take those three things together: coherence, which is otherwise known as the nomological order, a sense of significance and value, which is the normative order, and a sense of purpose or direction, the narrative order. And you can see how within these grand fundamental narratives, like the Christian story, life can, in a big way, make more sense and have more meaning, because you know who you are, you know what you should do every day, you know what's most important, what's not important, you know what to do if you make mistakes. And there you have, a sense that, hey, my life then has a purpose, it has a meaning, and you can have that peace that comes with it. So this is what religion has always done well, and it can continue to do and does continue to do for many people. Right? Again, my religious tradition has that basic Christian story along with its own flourishes that come out of its origination here in the Americas, especially in the United States, and it has a very American flavor to it, and in the way that that's panned out, and so it kind of has a nuance on that basic Christian story, but again is a comprehensive worldview and something that you can live in which I've lived in all my life, and by and large it has offered that sense of basic structure to life that gives you a sense of where you came from, who you are, where you're going, right? So that's what religion does well. So what comes out of that then is, I think, the next real strength of religion, and that's that when people live out these fundamental worldviews and participate in them, especially, then there's actual fruits in life. There's tangible, measurable things that happen out of it, right? Especially in the realm of your experience, but not just in the realm of experience. Like literally, scientific studies are done that by and large, religious people, of course, it's all in particulars of which religion at which times and stuff, do better on a number of accounts. You can quantify it, that by living within this comprehensive story, regardless of what some people may say it's superstition or whatnot, it produces fruit. And so that's why, religious people tend to be religious, is because it has real world tangible effects in their life. And when they participate in the rituals, they can feel something. They can feel something happening within them, a different state of consciousness, a different state of peace in their lives. Or by participating in a religion, they see something get better. Maybe they're able to quit smoking. Maybe the amount of their bank account goes up because of habits they've been able to develop, and the way that they felt in that religion, it's given them a new way of approaching life that it has that effect. Or maybe it's given them the means to heal relationships in their family, etc. And so, that to me is the greatest strength of religion for those that find those fruits happening in the religion, is that they're there. I mean, you have to say that at least in that sense of truth, a truth that produces tangible results in the world, religions can be very true. And in fact, that's my preferred definition of truth, is more this pragmatic definition of truth that says that things are true that produce results in the world, that have cash value, as it were. Okay, and so that's the other big thing about religion, is that even the most ardent atheist has to face that if you have a religious people, no matter how superstitious that atheist thinks their things are, and the outcomes of their life are markedly better than a group of people that doesn't have that, then you have to say, there is some sort of truth there. Of course, they'd probably account for it in a different way, but it's something that has to be accounted for, because it can be measured. A lot of people that don't believe in God will say it's because there are things that can't be proved, can't be measured. Well, the fruits of religion can be measured, and those need to be accounted with, right? And they're very real. All right, next. And here's one thing to point out with all this, is that I actually don't think that anybody can escape this religion as I've been describing it, as a basic worldview that you live in that produces results in your life. And so, of course, there are specific religions with specific worldviews that we're all very familiar with, whether it's a more Buddhist worldview, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, and everybody kind of lives more within those worldviews, and that's what we typically think. But in as much as these kinds of worldviews help us operate in the world, like everybody that does anything in the world has to have some sense of a worldview to try to give some sense of coherence and meaning to it. And so if we all in this sense are religious, we have to adopt a God, or gods, things, by having values, by valuing anything, and we are valuing beings. In essence, that becomes a God. In that speech where David Foster Wallace, The his famous "This is water" speech, I believe is what it's called. He makes this point that everybody has a God. It's just a matter of looking at that person and seeing what their God is. And so, for some people, if in as much as people have, for again what I'm going to get to, good reasons, abandon the traditional religious traditions, most people fall very nicely within some other kind of religious looking thing, whether it's environmentalism, whether it's the latest political movements, whether it's these certain woke movements that we're seeing, whether it's just a full-on devotion to materialism, in the sense of acquiring material wealth and dedicating yourself to your career or whatnot. Within all that, you're giving yourself to something greater than yourself within all those frameworks, and it's something that seems very fundamental to what we have to do as people, and even to function in the world and to make sense of the world, right? So it's worth pointing that out. But another big benefit of religion that I've found, and one of its greatest strengths, is I've come to believe religion is crucial to help us develop the new ideas and concepts within the human race. I think they start there, or they start emerging there, and then only later down the line do we get to kind of philosophizing abstract concepts, and then being able to have enough specificity in our minds to then design scientific experiments and things by which we can test things. And so, in a sense, I think all of our ideas and basic behaviors have to arise out of something, if not overtly religious, very much like religious. And so, what I mean by that, let me kind of walk you through that, is that I think we start in just regular life. We live out. We're all living. We're all goal-seeking, beings, living out our lives, trying to accomplish things, and in that process, we behave. We take actions, and in as much as actions are unsuccessful, we usually abandon those actions. And in as much as actions get us our goals and start making the world go better around us, we continue those actions, right? But oftentimes, I don't think we initially understand what we're doing when at that level, right, as that's happening. We don't have concepts for why things might be going better or worse. And so we do start at least replicating them in as much as they start making the world go better. But yeah, then there's this whole other process of actually eventually reaching an understanding of why those behaviors went better. Okay. And so the next step is that we then, once we realize that we're replicating this behavior and things are going better because of it, then we try to better understand that behavior by doing it over and over again, but maybe in a more abstract kind of sense, one level more abstract. And that's where we ritualize an event, or we dramatize a behavior or an event, right? And so if you notice, like a ritual, for example, is just a pattern of behavior, because a ritual has to be acted out. Oftentimes it involves basic things like food, processions, costumes, people playing roles, and oftentimes they're very difficult to understand what's going on in that ritual, right? But we know something's going on. It compels us. It demands that we pay attention a lot of times. And so think how often rituals are performed. They're done over and over and over again, many of them for reasons we don't even understand, okay? And so we have that. Then we have our dramatizations, especially in sacred stories or myth. These are the stories in scriptures or in more mythological kind of stories. And again, we tell these stories again and again, and the stories compel us. They're interesting to us, but oftentimes we can't say what they mean. You tell a story to a child, one of these mythical stories, they don't know what it means. They don't have a moral that they pull out of it. The story is just inherently interesting to them, and they can mimic that pattern of behavior, again, because we're getting all this down to behavior. Okay, but only then, after we start telling these stories over and over and doing these ritual processes over and over time, I think we start being able to look at it at one more level abstract than that and say, hey, there's a principle in here. There's there's something going on here in this pattern. Like, here's the abstract pattern itself. And by the time we're doing that, we're doing kind of theology or philosophy about things. And then, of course, those things need to be tested. And finally, they've reached the point where, they can be more discussed and debated in an academic setting, and then experiments found to put them into a scientific process to then be able to do the experiments on. So I don't know if I articulated this whole process as good as I probably could have. I need to work on it. But the main essence of it is that I think it is, you see the religion in that process. The way that we've come to understand ideas and behaviors flows through a religious process and reaches a point by only then we can then put it into theories, philosophical ideas, and then scientific experiments that can be tested. And because one of the deepest difficulties with science is knowing what to do science on, or a theory to develop that could then be have an experiment tested to test that theory. And coming up with those theories is just as crucial as actually performing the experiments, and it's difficult. And where do we find the theories? I think the theories usually come out of something that is developed through a religious process. So that's another strength of religion. And so in the end, as you kind of to sum up this section of it, I think religion is very good at producing the narratives and the practices, especially. So the narratives would be the stories, and the practices, those could be rituals, but there's other kind of practices, the practice of meditation, a practice of, even in our family, we kind of, within the context of our religion, have a family council, or maybe a family script. We study a sacred text together as a family, right at a mealtime. That's both a ritual, but also a practice, that gets to the more procedural, perspectival, participatory kinds of knowing that John Vervaeke has developed very well. I'm gathering these these words and these terms all from him. But the crucial thing is, those things are the key kinds of knowledge that then lead to growth and transformation in us. So in other words, religion is very good at dealing with the kinds of knowledge, participating kind of knowledge, perspectival knowledge. So that's like the knowledge of religion offers you the framework to be able to say, what would Jesus do, for example? So in as much as you're looking at the world now, trying to look at it through Jesus's eyes, you see a different world. You see a different course of action. That's a different perspective, right? So religion right there helped you develop an enhanced perspective with which to look at the world, right? So there's a perspectival knowledge, and then participatory knowledge. That kind of knowledge of participating in practices, participating in rituals, but more than anything, participating in this grand worldview that the religion offers. And by doing those things, those are the things that transform you. Those are the things that develop you. And hopefully, you develop just like you did when you went from a child to a young adult. Religion, when at its best and in its strongest, develops people from adults into sages, adults into saints. That's what it's supposed to do anyway. And in many regards, people do feel those kinds of forces working on them. We'll get into the weaknesses of those kinds of notion, right? But that is the strength, and we're focusing on the strength. So in the end, I think religion's greatest strength is that it offers processes of development, and that is the best way to see what religion does and why it's of value to us and why it's been of value to me in my life. I want to become something else, and religion offers me a number of tools and frameworks in order to become and develop, right? Okay, so that's it on the strengths. We'll go dive into weaknesses, but I see we've got a couple comments here. So Martin says it's a dangerous thing to assume that there's no objective truth. Yeah, well, again, the truth is a tricky thing because it all depends on how you want to define truth. And that's where, you can get into all sorts of thorny debates about what truth is. And then a lot of people, that want to, a common way of looking at it is that there's objective truth, things that never change and never will. And then you kind of got more of a postmodernist, no, all things are relative and can be seen from different perspectives. That's one way of looking at it. And the problem is there's actually truth to both of those perspectives. There do seem to be things that are core and unchanging, but there's also the very nature of reality is that everything can be seen from a perspective. And that's where, to me, what I try to do is say, well, what's the truth that matters to me most? And I care most, like I said at the beginning of this stream, about wisdom, about developing wisdom in my life, which has some sort of applied, practical consequence in the world. And that's where the kind of truth that I like to focus on does become more this American pragmatism version of truth, which is the truth that actually changes something in my life. And that I can evaluate that way for the worse or for the better. And that's where I think the kind of truth that can best be evaluated within religion is that kind of pragmatic truth, because it's the one that you can see. You can either experience it, you can see it in other people, and you can even measure it, through scientific study. That's the kind of truth that is most accessible to us. Whereas the other kinds of truths that, that we're going to get into, more propositional truth, are the kinds people oftentimes say are also at the core of religions. God is exactly of this nature right here, and that's truth, and it's never going to change. But of course, the difficulty about that is so many of those kinds of truths are debated by other people, and there's not ways to test them or prove them. And so then you end up with we're going to lead off in just a second with the weaknesses of religion, is that religion tends to start insisting on unchanging objective truths, but then of course others disagree, and then you have unending conflicts between religions, or religions make these truth claims in ways that can never be verified, and people get some people get tired of them after a while and say, look, I can never access that claim that you're making. There's no way to prove it or unprove it or anything, and people can get frustrated with that really quick. So anyway, that's where I personally like to kind of evaluate things more at that level of pragmatic truth, as defined in American pragmatism. Pragmatic doesn't just mean like go with what kind of works in the given moment. It's deeper than that, right? But anyway, so and Martin, I'm not saying that's exactly what you were meaning. That's just kind of where my mind went on reading your comments. So you may have been talking about something a little bit different altogether. But anyway, that's what kind of came to mind based off of your comment. All right, Hrishikesh. I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly. What's wrong in saying we don't know for things we don't know, like God? Yeah, we'll get to that. I think that's a very good point that we're going to get to, because yeah, of course that is what leads to one of many of the weaknesses of religion. So let's delve down now into at least my humble list of what I'm at least experiencing as the greatest weaknesses of religions right now. So like I just said, there's this other kind of truth that we deal with all the time in the world now, and it's that propositional truth. And the propositional truth is what schooling tends to focus on more. It's the kind of truth that you can get tested on in a test. It's the truths that a lot of science tries to put out there, the propositions of life. Like if you kind of think of a nerd is oftentimes somebody that's well versed in lots of propositional truths out there and has all the facts ready for you, right? These would be, what Jeopardy is all about. The game show is getting all the right propositional truths, the right facts, the true facts ready. And so that is one type of knowledge, and our world has come to focus tremendously on it in our schooling, in kind of the characters that we value, because science and nerds focus a lot on propositional truth, and that's who we've elevated at the moment as there in our society. But we were just talking about these other kinds of truth that are also important, especially as it comes to development of ourselves and particularly to meaning. And so that's where religion comes back in as very important, and we've ignored that. But nonetheless, there's this other kind of truth, propositional truth, and religion gets wrapped up in it in ways that I think it shouldn't, right? And so eventually, virtually every religion that I know inevitably starts getting into the realm of insisting on truth of propositions for which there's no access or evidence. Things that we can't directly experience, or if they did happen at a certain time of the world, there's no going back and verifying those propositions, right? And so these are all the claims that people will eventually make fun of. Some of them are historical claims, whether it's a creationist view of the world, that the world was only made 5,000 years ago, and evolution couldn't possibly be correct. That's a propositional claim right there. And again, it creates conflict with the other aspects of the world, like scientific processes that make other propositional claims. So it makes a conflict, right? And of course, from religions to other religions, there's very different sets of propositional claims. And what's funny is that sometimes some of the religions that are most close to one another in terms of the other kinds of knowledge, the way they actually live out their lives. I mean, let's say, right there in the news, we have Palestine and the state of Israel right there, right? I've even heard or seen, Muslim and Jewish commentators talk about how, it's amazing how similar at the core level the ways of life of these two peoples are in terms of, their moral values, in terms of how they see God even. They even very much say, we're worshiping the same God and whatnot. But of course, it's the differences in propositional claims about that God or about certain events in history or things like that, which come to create tremendous conflict even between two peoples that are in many ways very much the same. And you see that in other religions too. Whole wars fought over little doctrinal claims within Christianity, for example, which may have some real world consequences a little bit, but not much, right? And yet whole wars will be fought over that. But and the most difficult thing about them is that usually these propositional claims can't be proved or unproved, right? Nonetheless, so many religions continue to insist on their followers kind of adhering to these claims. They ask them to believe, right? Just believe in these things. And that notion of belief, we've kind of accepted as, well, that's what it means to believe something. You look back like anciently at what faith and belief meant, and at least I haven't found nearly as much that sense of faith and belief as faith and belief being something more like faithfulness, right? To be devotion, commitment, to be, to be faithful to something is to be committed to it. Not necessarily that you assent to propositions for which you have no evidence or no direct access, if that makes sense. And so again, I think this is where the weakness of religion comes in and why people start leaving, because other credible means of acquiring propositional claims, such as scientific processes, start making different propositional claims than religions do. Again, with historical claims from the Bible, or things about evolution, or things about claims about homosexuality and whether it's a sin or not a sin, or something biological or not. You see how very easily propositional claims come to clash with each other. Different peoples cling to their propositional claims, and then conflict arises. And sometimes, let's say over time, a scientific proposition tends to have more evidence for it, but it clashes with some religion's propositional claim about the past or about the way, something is. And then that's where people say, I'm not liking this. Like, this religion seems not true to me anymore. I think that's what's happening to a lot of people, is that these it's because of historical claims. It's because of inherent, propositional claims that got made along the way theologically, get done in religions, and then they're adhered to as if to change on those propositional claims would topple the religion. And so that's what I see as one of the fundamental weaknesses right now of religions. Okay, and next is that religions, haven't caught up to the reality of a pluralistic global world, and that makes them inherently less relevant to our pluralistic global culture. So when most religions developed, they developed in a time and a place where people are generally fairly isolated from, at least to a much greater degree than the world as we know it today, where we're in constant contact with all other countries in the world, all other worldviews, all other religions, right? And so in that kind of setting, you can develop a worldview that works pretty good for where you are in that context. And that's where you'll get in almost any ancient culture, or certainly any most traditional religions, their original kind of ways that they would map the world and things like that would be that they would situate themselves at the center of the map. Okay, so oftentimes, like in medieval maps, Jerusalem is at the center of the world, but it's very much the same as if you come to like North American Indians and whatnot. They see themselves as living at the center of the world. And oftentimes, like one thing that's very interesting that I found here in Montana is that almost every different Indian tribe, their name that they have for themselves, translated in their own language, means the people. Like, we're the people of the world, right? And then when you see people's maps and representations or talk to them, outside of their society is kind of the non-people. It's the barbarians, it's the monsters, it's the aliens. And it's funny how across the world, so many people have defined themselves in that way. Like, we are the world, and outside of our basic boundaries, there's a limit to us, and there's a fringe. And then outside of that is the unknown regions where unknown things live, which tend to be barbarians, monsters, giants, etc. Right, and that worked as far as a framework for the world for where people were at the time. But then, of course, we have the modern age, we have transportation, we have now connections all together in the world, and now we live in this pluralistic global world where we're constantly confronted with different worldviews, different ways of life. Like, you can't just say other people they're barbarians now because you're doing business with them and traveling to their places all the while. And so in many ways, I think religion hasn't caught up. They developed in non-pluralistic worlds by and large, but now they're made to try to operate in pluralistic worlds, and they haven't been able to change rapidly enough to account for that, especially as to their propositions. Right? And that's why something like Western consumerism, worship of economy and wealth, which I would claim are the gods of United States society, still European society, and so much of the world now, has become the de facto religion, because that one fits much better in a pluralistic world. Everybody can participate in that religion, and the propositions of it don't conflict as much. There's not propositional claims there that everybody can't adhere to. Instead, it offers propositional claims such as more wealth is better, and exchange usually can end up with more wealth for both of us, and things like that make it a very good global religion. And that's why it became the global religion. Of course, I'm not saying it's a great religion. I think it has fundamental flaws, but you can at least see why that religion adapted to a global world better than any of the other religions. And of course, yes, many religions spread in different ways and whatnot, but by and large, in Europe and the United States, we're still seeing people leaving religion in one sense because I don't think they operate well. So many religions claim to be the truth, right? And when you're claiming to be the truth, and yet there's all these other entities claiming to be the truth, that becomes hard to deal with, especially as you're interacting more with people from elsewhere in the world. You're interacting with very good people from other world, very good, noble, holy people from other faith traditions, etc. And I think a lot of religions haven't been able to account for that. Some have, right? So within that, like even religions such as my own that insist on the religious freedom and are very serious about it. Like my faith tradition does a lot of work on the the topic of religious freedom, and do serious work to further at conferences, talk about it openly, right? Which makes sense given that my people's history here in the United States was one of persecution, getting kicked out of places, and ultimately having to work very hard just to realize the religious freedom that should have been there already in the United States, right? And wasn't in a lot of ways. So we're very serious about that. But nonetheless, like my faith tradition has a fundamental stance of being the only one true religion, of being the only one that has the authority to bring about salvation, right? Which works to a degree when you're a small religion there in the United States, just growing and you're not encountering all the rest of the world and stuff. But in today's world, again, where you're constantly in contact with other good traditions, other holy people, other people that are just as fervent about their religion and seem to be changed by their religion just as much as you do, that claim of one true religion, of being the only one to have authority or to be able to bring about salvation, things like that, that becomes harder to deal with, to such a point that many can't deal with it and they leave the institution. Again, I'm not saying every religion has those kind of stances, but many do, even in a pluralistic world, right? And so, again, it's important to see how, in as much as many of these religions came about at times of the world where even a whole section of the world, the New World, the Americas, didn't even exist. There's parts missing in their fundamental stories about something like the New World. That's an unaccounted thing, because in terms of the world when the religion was made, the New World didn't exist at that time. And so you'll see those kinds of gaps in the story. All right, next, as far as a weakness for religion, is that no religion that I've found, at least of yet, lives up to its fundamental promise, at least as we experience it. And that, what I mean by that is, most religions start out with somebody, whether it's Gautama Buddha, whether it's Jesus Christ, whether in my own religion with Joseph Smith, somebody that has some fundamental, like, transformative experience, or stands out as special, as transformed, as holy in this way. And usually they're saying, look, I've got the principles that everybody can participate in this same kind of thing, right? And so then people follow them, and everybody goes for that aimed for state. And then by and large, as time passes, people don't obtain that same state, right? The masses, by and large, are fairly disappointing. They're fairly just mundane as far as their regular lives. When you look at the bodies of most adherents of most religion, they're not particularly impressive, let's say, at least when compared to the rest of humanity. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying anything else. I'm just saying that as you encounter the general bodies of most religions, the most people that are living them out and whatnot, they don't seem to have what the actual religion is aiming for, right? The state that people are aiming for. Of course, every religion has its saints, its special people that got way farther and stand out as people that maybe obtained that state that the religion is for, but they're those special people that can maybe be listed on a single page or something like that, not the millions that have been adherents of those religions. So when you see that again and again and again in these institutional religions, that's another reason why I think people say, well, they make big claims, these institutional religions, but I'm not seeing it from the people that, as far as I can see, are living out the rituals, the practices of the religion, but they don't seem to be transforming in the ways that religion claims to be doing. Of course, some religions, deal with that by saying, well, it's all in the next world, it's all in the next life. It's a convenient way to kind of punt the issue. But most religions claim to produce transformation of people here. And that's where it becomes more debatable if people fundamentally transform in the way that the religion promises. I'm not saying religion doesn't have its effect on people. Again, you can measure it. People lives can improve and things like that, but not to the level that most of the religions are claiming they should change, right? The levels of holiness, the levels of fundamentally different worldviews. Most people, for the most part, their main religion is Western consumerism, and they have the side hobby of their other religion where they give the lesser amount of time and it produces, and the less energies too, and the less amount of their life actually revolves around. That's the way it tends to play out. So in a society like ours today, where this other religion is won out, no wonder that most people, or not most people, but many people leave the institutional religions and say, I'm just going to play this main religion that everybody's playing, which does produce real results. I can get more money in my bank account, or at least I can try to, right? And there's a lot more, millionaires and people that have kind of obtained the status that you should from a religion in the Western consumer capitalist model than there is from these other religions. So no wonder people, leave it for that, right? And then another thing is that no religion shines above and beyond all the others. Okay, so that's another kind of weakness that I see in religion in general, is that they oftentimes form and make all these propositional claims for them, but then, and again, I think they do change people. I've felt them in my own religion. They do deliver in the basics of what they offer, which is more peace in your life, more meaning in your life, etc. But at the same time, no one tradition shines above and beyond all the others. And then you also see a number of people who seem to be living just as meaningful lives as religious people that don't adhere to any religion as well, right? And so when you look at that and you say, well, look, I've got these different religious traditions. In general, I can see some people that are doing pretty good in them. It's transformed them to a bit, but nothing that, it is like so impressive that I'm just clamoring to go over there and get what they have. When you see that by and large, and you see that across the different religious traditions, and you see people outside the religious traditions that also have at least obtained that same kind of level of peace and meaning in their life, then that can also suggest to you in your mind, like, do I need this religious tradition, this institution per se, to obtain that basic level of meaning that a lot of people seem to have? Okay, so and the fact of it is that if there was one tradition that just all of its adherents suddenly started doing so fundamentally, compellingly better than everybody else, more peace in their life, better interactions with each other, better health, better mental health, more prosperity, and it was just above and beyond everybody else, right? Then I would join that people, right? Wouldn't you? I mean, that would be the mark of a true religion to me. That's where I get to like the pragmatic level of truth, is that these things everything has to bear fruits. By your fruits you shall know them. And when you look and you don't see that thing, even maybe your own tradition that has its fruits above and beyond everybody else, right? Then you're left saying, do I even need my tradition? Is it just any tradition can do? And as long as you, give it sufficient devotion that will produce the basic level of meaning that you can find within these things, you start asking yourself those questions. Or maybe I don't need any tradition, and as long as I kind of pick out what a lot of people like to do today, kind of pick out what they want. Oh, a little yoga here, a little meditation over there. Maybe I'll still kind of dabble in my Christianity as well, and I'll kind of cobble together some meaning out of that. Maybe I can just get the same basic religious state as everybody else without having to, participate all the time in the thing and give my money to it and all that kind of thing. So, again, that's what I think is happening to people that leads them to then say, do I actually need my religious tradition as well? Okay, so that's my basic list. Let me go over it one more time, make sure I didn't leave anything out. And I'm glad to see that you're getting some activity on the chat, which we'll return to. All right, so let me just go over this real quick. Sometimes in kind of I get a little bit lost and can't pay attention to anything else. I'm not that great of a multitasker, and so oftentimes I'll get talking and then kind of miss that I miss some fundamental point. All right, one thing that I should say as well, because I'm sure there's probably at least some people from my own tradition, as far as people that know me and stuff like that, might say, well, why do you stay in your tradition, or are you going to leave, or something like that? And see, one of the stances I should bring out is that I have experienced good results from my own religious tradition. That's where, I go back and there were strengths, that I was pointing out about being in a religion and things like that. And I have found value in it. I continue to find value, and it is my tradition. It's where my family is established, my extended families, and there's a lot of cultural value to it as well. And I do see specific good kind of extras in my religion that I like, more than other religions. But at the same time, I've seen enough of the world by this point to look at the people of my tradition and look at others and say, in many ways, Latter-day Saints do better than other people on some marks of health, some marks of satisfaction, in different ways. But it's not leaps and bounds above anyone else, enough to say that anybody's looking at the Latter-day Saints being like, wow, those people are just like head and heels doing better, prospering better than anyone else. And so given that's but also the opposite is true. I don't see any other tradition that is doing leaps and bounds better than my own tradition. So that leads me to say, like, there is a value to faithfulness to your tradition, to your culture, and to doing what I'm doing right now, which is trying to think about how could things improve within the tradition or culture that you're in. That's why I'm also not a big fan of people participating or kind of jumping into tradition, religious traditions or practices that are completely foreign to them, because I don't think you can actually get the full measure of those rituals and practices without the other fundamental worldview surrounding you, which is usually embedded in a culture. I'm not saying there can't be any value to it at all, but yeah, I do look down a little bit. Again, not in a judgmental way, but just in a way that I wouldn't do. I do look down a little bit into just kind of picking and choosing practices from here and there. Like yoga is a really great example. The way that people just casually jump into this practice, which is a spiritual practice that was embedded in a culture and a tradition and a worldview, and expect that it's going to produce anything near the same results. And why not look for the things in your own tradition and develop those, which are bound to have at least more meaning and be more compelling to you in that sense. So that is worth saying. So, all right, at this point, I'm going to end up with just some short points of what I think should come from this. I always want to just not produce points, strengths and weaknesses, but also put out there, well, here's how maybe things could be better going forward. Again, always humbly, because in that pursuit of wisdom, the fundamental thing is to realize you are not wise, you don't know, etc. And so here's these final points. I think that what any religion needs to do, any tradition needs to do today, is to quit looking for these final propositions, and establish them as final propositions. I'm fine with any tradition, forming a structure and saying, here's our structure, here's what we adhere to as part of our story, here are the basic points. But in this pluralistic world, I think it's so dangerous and non-compelling to make final propositional claims. Even if there are, and I think we're going to get to that with Martin, because I see that he disagreed with something that I say, because I do believe there is truth out there. But to even if you're a religion, to say like, oh, we've got it, right, and here it is, that's such a dangerous game, and one that could end up with people leaving you later when it doesn't turn out to be exactly the way that you thought to. Maybe you advanced the truth or something like that. But when you make final propositional claims, like many religions do, what do you end up with? You end up with these conflicts. You end up with things being disproven by other methods of propositional knowledge, such as science, and you end up with people disillusioned, disappointed, and leaving. So I think the far better way to look at it is that your own religion is a process of development. That the greatest strength of any religion is the other kinds of knowledge, the participatory in particular, but also the perspectival and whatnot, and see and focus the religion on the development of people, right? Not on the getting all the facts just right and straight. And in as much as you do have to have some propositions and things like that, have some humility about them and say, but maybe we're wrong. This can change. This isn't set in stone. We've got to have a stability. So we're setting it here, but we're not going to say that this is the one truth and everybody else is wrong. I think that's a dangerous stance and one that puts off a lot of people today. Okay, the next thing I think we need some sort of meta narrative for our world today if we expect to do what I think so many of us are feeling needs to happen in the world, which is to essentially create a new worldview in our world. That our old one, it was kind of comes out, our last one, and as much as we've been talking about the fourth turning from this post-war period where we ended up with the United States kind of as this global policeman. We had a strong faith in science and technology to move us along in terms of the world, and this kind of Western culture to make everything great in many ways, improve the world in many ways, but it's reached its limits, and now we live even more in this global culture that, in as much as it's challenged a lot of the traditions of the world, needs to develop some sort of worldview that can account for everything going on in the world, both the plurality of everything, and be okay with that plurality, while at the same time producing something that the world can unify around. I mean, you have to have kind of the allowance for both those things, those fundamental principles of reality, both something to unify us, while at the same time realizing our plurality. And it's, the United States, that was kind of the basic idea that still lies at the heart of what the United States was supposed to be, a place that was, from many one. But of course, it's that one thing that's become so difficult to define. What is the thing that can unify everyone today? So I'm not pretending to have that answer. Maybe we can explore that more later. But we need that sort of meta-narrative. And I think religions need to be open to that sort of meta-narrative. But of course, so many aren't. It's got to be their worldview, their religion that takes over everything else, or nothing. And that just doesn't work, I think, in the world today. One thing I should say is I'm one of the things or books that I come back to a lot is this book right here, The Metaphysical Club, which is all about this notion of a pluralistic world and the dangers that come from trying to establish absolutes. And it talks about 4 titanic kind of American thinkers, William James, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Charles Sanders Peirce, and John Dewey, who grew up in the effects of mindsets that insisted on absolutes, and the result of that was the American Civil War, right? Which in many ways was not a great outcome, and they lived through it and regretted it. The people that, some of them were even for it before, but by the time it was after it, they regretted that war because of the carnage and the brother against brother nature of it. So I think that's something that, that's why I feel a sense of warning for this, that unless we recognize the plural nature of the world and stop making the absolute kind of claims onto other people, then we end up with something that looks a lot like the American Civil War. Maybe there will be a victor after it, but I think we'll all regret that war afterwards. Okay, so here's the final thing I'll end with. Or we need one group of people to start living so compellingly better than everybody else in the world that it becomes clear that small group of people has the answer. They're living so compellingly better than the rest of us that it just becomes obvious that this is what the world needs to, this is the thing that can unify us. So if you think you're that group of people out in the world, let's see it in a sense. In a small way, or a big way, whichever way you want to look at it, that is a little bit the story of Christianity and the Roman Empire. You have these stories about how there, for the first few hundred years of Christianity, the early Christians lived in such a different and compelling way that it garnered the attention, even as they were being, persecuted and whatnot. It garnered the attention of people in the Roman world little by little until, at this certain point, there's a tipping point with Constantine, where this small fledgling tradition is seen as the answer for the whole world, in essence, which was the Roman Empire as far as their world, and the whole empire ends up converting. I'm not saying, I'm not trying to put a value on that was good or bad or anything like that. That's to be debated in another kind of setting. But what I'm saying is that I think that happened because there was a compelling way of life being demonstrated that was so different. And you talk about the way that Christians saw all these people that were non-peoples, the slaves, the women, etc., as full persons, and were living that out, that caught the attention of people and eventually did change the world. I mean, Christianity has changed the world tremendously, and it came from that. So I'll just put that, that's another possibility. Some group has to do that. And I would, I hate to say it, but my religious tradition, at least as of now, I don't think is doing that. If we could get to that point, we're not doing it yet, right? And so doesn't mean I'm leaving or abandoning it. It just means that we're not that kind of compelling people yet, even though sometimes we like to think we are. So we have work to do. Anyway, let's get back to the chat. That's all I really wanted to get out on my part today, but I want to very much interested in what you have to say. So let's get back to Martin. You said, I disagreed. Only Catholic Church claims it is the truth. Unis Sancta Apostolica Ecclesia. If you look more precisely, you'll see that no other religion makes that claim. I think a lot of religions make that claim, even if not technically as to precise doctrines. Because again, my church makes that claim, so there's one. I think many church, even if they don't have it as a precise thing saying we are the one true church, at least the people live out that way. So I live here in a setting where there's a lot of different Christian variety around me. There's a strong Catholic tradition. There's Pentecostals here. There's German Baptists. There's Mennonites. There's Amish people. There's Methodists. There's Lutherans. I mean, this is great Christian. This is America. Through and through here. And then there's the tribe, the Indian tribe, because I live on an Indian reservation. The tribe both predominantly has a Catholic identification, but of course they also identify with their other traditions as well. So you have this tremendous religious plurality. And as I talk to people, a lot of people, of course, respect other people, just like my faith tradition respects other people and their religious freedoms and things like that. But I also sense people saying, but mine's right. Mine is better. Mine is more true than yours at the end of the day. Of course, we get along, we can be neighbors and things like that. But I think it's very common for religions to hold those kinds of views. Like a lot of Protestant religions have that kind of, even if they don't have that exactly to other Protestant religions, they certainly have that towards the Catholic Church. And if they have that toward the Catholic Church, they've kind of got to have that towards the Orthodox Church as well, which you can see as different things or the same things. So I do think it exists that church makes these claims. And that's where, I think there's a matter of degree in that we have to get by, whereas we're not so concerned about saying we are the right answer, but more concerned about saying we are trying to develop people and enhance people to be greater persons, to be more godlike. If you're within Christianity, to be, our main focus is just trying to help people to be more like Christ, to adopt his manner of living. But again, since much of the world is not Christian, the tent kind of has to go beyond that as well. On my little dashboard here, I'm saying that the the connection is being slow, so I'm hoping the stream quality here gets restored and it's not going to end. But if it does, I apologize. Or if you're just getting audio, if it's backing up, I apologize about that. But I'm just going to go forward and finish this out either way. So let's see. Martin says, but I think I get what you were trying to say, especially in Catholic Church today. You can see what happens when leaders fail. Okay, MQ. Thank you for the emoji. Martin says, money is a god that seems true. Yeah, so I think one thing that's worth saying there, Martin, with your next comment there, money is a god that seems true. That's the thing about money that's so compelling, or kind of the more capitalistic consumerist mindset. The fact that so many people devote most of their lives and energies to their career, to acquiring wealth, to getting a bigger home, car, etc., is that, yeah, it's true. It works. It is. That's where I used to think in terms, in kind of the terms that thought that there's one God and there's no other gods, right? But I've shifted my mentality on that. I did a whole stream on that talked about how I now see the world that there are a multitude of gods. I, of course, being a Christian and being in my own tradition, see one God as the God of gods. But something like, I see that there very much is a God that is being worshipped by the world at large, and there's even names for it. Like some people will call it Moloch, some people will call it Babylon, whatever you want to say. This Christian, sorry, not Christian, but this capitalistic Western worldview is a god. It has its priests, it has its religious centers. Again, the 9/11 terrorists, they struck at the god of America, of the United States, which was much more the World Trade Center towers than it was some cathedral somewhere. They didn't go after a cathedral. They went for the buildings that represented the God of the United States, and they were right in that, which is why it shook the country so when they did that. In a way that I don't think it would have quite as much. Of course, it would have made a lot of people angry, but it wouldn't have quite as much if it would have been just a cathedral. So that's pretty telling. Martin, you also say, because it's difficult to obey the laws of religions, it's much easier to stay the wretched men we are. This doesn't indicate that a religion is less true. So yeah, I'd agree with that. Like, religions are always aspirational. Again, that doesn't mean they're wrong or bad. And like I've said, they have this strength to them. And that's why I'm still religious and still very much engaged and compelled by religion. But I can understand why so many people are abandoning these institutional religions, because maybe either they see that some of the laws that are put in place are outdated. They no longer make sense in our world, and that happens sometimes. Or they see so many people that adhere to those laws and their lives don't seem more compelling. There's some of that. Or they see a lot of people that are just hypocritical and they don't actually even follow the real tenets of the institutional religion, which can also off-put people about religion. So yeah, there's a lot of ways in which we can come up short there. But nonetheless, it doesn't say that religions are bad. I still do think they are, one, inevitable, and two, do produce a lot of good. But I think they've developed problems, and there's an opening there. There's an opening for a already established religious institution or new religious institutions to take a stand and present a different worldview that operates better in this pluralistic world and does, in essence, what the Christians did to the Roman Empire, which is demonstrate a new and more compelling way of life that can at least be the next, a next answer. Even if not like the only answer, but a next answer for how society progresses from this point, grows, right? Yeah. Laurent says, I returned to my religion recently, and I felt the same frustration with the institutional part of it. All the pastors I looked up to start to cower before the recent problems of the world. Yeah, and of course, and very much, feel the same thing. It's a little bit easier in my tradition because it's a non-professional clergy, which means that the the clergy kind of leaders actually turn over, and everybody realizes they're imperfect. So to that extent, it works. But then you go up to, there are kind of a permanent set of leaders up at the top of my tradition. And, a lot of people get frustrated with that level of the institution because there's a big claims that's where there's big claims made about the people at the top of my religious tradition. They're seen as the 12 apostles, like the continuation of the tradition of the 12 apostles. And there's one that's seen as a prophet, like the prophet, like a Moses or an Abraham kind of a prophet figure. And so they're supposed to be able to operate in the world like a Moses or an Abraham would. And of course, a lot of the adherents of my tradition would say, yes, they do. But in other ways, they don't. In other ways, they administer the church and they live decent lives. They're good exemplars of good, healthy lives. But they may not rise up exactly to what you might expect from when you look at the nature of the religious figures of the past, the ones that we venerate the most, which most of them, by and large, were not. That's the interesting thing about a Moses or an Abraham or things. They're not super perfect people. They have major flaws. But what I do see them do is they they engage with God and they operate in the world in very compelling ways, right? Very courageous ways. They find new ways of relating to God and dealing with social situations, and so anyway, yeah, that's all to say that it's a difficult thing because on the one hand you want to be I guess deferential or humble in the sense that these people are just trying to do their best to fulfill out a role, and they're going to do it imperfectly. But in as much as they do embody the institutional part of the church, of any church, so often it can be frustrating to feel that institutional part isn't quite measuring up with what the more principle doctrinal side of things promises, right? I guess that's the way I'd put it. Martin says, but isn't this what Freemasonry is all about? This seemed like a more dangerous route to take if you believe that Freemasonry is evil. So let's see. I'm trying to see what you're exactly referring to, maybe a specific part, so you could help me out with that, Martin. If you want to say a little bit more about that, let me look that over and see if I have something to say about that. But isn't this about Freemasonry? Because I know Freemasonry, I do know a pretty decent amount about Freemasonry because actually Freemasonry influenced in some important ways my own faith tradition, and especially our temple rituals that we do inside of our temples. But as I understand Freemasonry, what it seemed to always be about was about forming better a brotherhood and men helping men be better men. I think at its basic level, Freemasonry never had anything wrong about it. But of course, when it operates with the level of of a secret kind of thing, anything that has that kind of secret, even if it's termed sacred, anything that kind of operates behind closed doors, both has the potential, either just imagined or in actuality, to become something else, right? And so, as far as I know, like my attitude toward Freemasonry is that, at least at certain points in history, it seemed to, in some ways, accomplish what the basic thing is that it's trying to achieve, which it was helping men join together in a community in a meaningful way to try to be better men. And yes, they have rituals in that that help accomplish that, but that's how I perceive it. Now, I know maybe there's all sorts of history and things I don't know, or nefarious things that happen. But again, I don't know how much of that is just our imaginations of what happened because it's the secret society, or if that was actually the case. So maybe that was, maybe that wasn't. But that's, I guess, all I can say about Freemasonry is that I don't see it necessarily as an inherently bad thing or an inherently good thing. And it probably has produced plenty of good in the way that it operates, is in the way that I understand that it operates. As to the bad, I don't know. So, all right, I think that's about it for today as far as your comments and questions. Looks like we've exhausted that. So hopefully this was of value to you, and I appreciate the chance to kind of get these things out, because sometimes these ideas and these things, they're just floating around in my mind, and I want to get them out, share them with people, and get their reactions. Hopefully someday I can turn this into something a little more polished and find some better way to present it. Thanks, Chase. Just saw your comment, and nice always to see you on here, Chase. So yeah, I think that's it for today. We'll see if we can get Sarah on here tomorrow again, I know at least 1 out of 5 days, it's very nice to have the Sarah's input on things. Of course, it's nice, all the time, but I know it's kind of a breath of fresh air to have her be a little bit different presence, get into different topics. So we'll see if we can't get on together tomorrow. And yes, I am still working on Interstellar. No, still not done yet, but hopefully within these next couple days. But yeah, that's it. We've exhausted everything today. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and I am signing off. This is Gary from Mission Top signing off for today. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day as well.